Amazon is usually the best place to buy basically anything, from a pair of AirPods to 22 pounds of protein. But when it comes to GPUs, it's one of the worst places to buy one. Did you just see that? Everything is either out of stock, insanely overpriced, or actual butt-cheek water. And somehow I managed to find a GPU that checked all 3 boxes. It was out of stock, insanely overpriced, and actually not that bad. So obviously I had to buy it. And today we're gonna overclock this Amazon GPU until we get 360 FPS. I had to literally put my blood, sweat, and tears into this challenge. Because first of all, how do you even buy a GPU that's out of stock? Simple, you don't. You buy it secondhand. That's how I was able to get this exact GPU from Amazon for $36. But while I was waiting for it to ship, I noticed something way worse than the GPU itself. The PC I was planning to put the GPU in has the worst airflow I've ever seen. I cannot breathe within 500 meters of this thing. There are no bottom fans, no side fans. Just straight suffering. Now you might not think that's a huge issue, and for the most part, it isn't. My current GPU doesn't go above 81 degrees even in a game as demanding as Cyberpunk. But that's because I'm not overclocking. This GPU is going to be pushed to speeds far beyond what it was designed to handle, and that means it's going to run hot. And with airflow this bad, that heat has nowhere to go. So to get the highest FPS possible out of this GPU, I had to buy some new fans for this challenge. However, before I even started installing the new fans, I noticed another massive issue. Since I never planned to add more fans to this case, there is no space for new fans.
Basically, you're supposed to put the wires over this bar so that you have space for the fans, but unfortunately the wires are underneath.
Only I could pull off a mistake as stupid as this. After about 10 minutes of rewiring and trying my best to not get stabbed by a motherboard pin, I finally made enough room for 2 fans. But immediately after that, I made the most obvious rookie mistake you can think of. I installed the fans the wrong way. Hot air is supposed to rise. Instead, I had the fan sucking the air back down into the case, so that there's a hyperthermia wind tunnel circulating in my PC. On a scale of 1 to stupid, I gotta be at least 2. I wouldn't even realize that the fans were the wrong way until the GPU arrived at my house the next day. And somehow during this process, this happened.
Ow, ow. Oh shit.
I stabbed my thumb with a motherboard pin. At least the pin didn't bend, but I was slightly worried about, you know, infecting my thumb. This was actually the second time my thumb started bleeding this video because I got a paper cut from the cardboard box just a few minutes ago. So yeah, my right thumb is not having a great time right now. And not even 5 minutes later, I ran into another issue, and this one is going to cost me real money. The side fan simply wouldn't fit next to my motherboard. So now I had to go and buy more fans. Eventually, after I installed the side fan and replaced the old black ones at the top, all in the wrong direction, my PC decided to hit me with a recovery error. If you're a gamer, you know this is one of the worst things to see because it could mean you're stuck in an automatic repair loop. Luckily, restarting my desktop somehow fixed it and everything ran as normal. The next day, this abomination of a box finally showed up on my doorstep.
Allow users to have no excellent compatibility. What the fuck does that mean? Smooth and smooth playback effect. Yep, smooth and smooth.
Almost as smooth as my custom mousepad. If you want to get the cleanest mousepad in the game, be sure to check out the link in the description. We now have free shipping to the US, UK, and Canada. But the graphics card itself actually looked way better in person than it did in the photos, so that was a nice surprise. But before we get too deep, I should probably tell you what this GPU actually is, since I haven't really talked about it yet, apart from calling it trash and garbage. In reality, the RX 580 2048 SP is one of the best GPUs you can buy for under $50, hence why we're targeting such a high frame rate. And we're gonna overclock it to get as many frames as possible in both Rocket League and Fortnite. Out of the box, the AI Cyrix GPU has a core clock of 1244 MHz and a memory clock of 1750. And surprisingly, that was already enough to get some serious numbers in Rocket League. At 1080p on performance settings, we averaged 337 FPS with a 1% low of 306. I know we're already close, but closing that final 7% gap isn't easy. That's the same percent difference between a 4070 Super and a 4070 Ti. So while it sounds small, it's still a big ask for a $36 GPU. Obviously, we won't just stop at 360 FPS, but that is the main goal. We'll also be testing Fortnite just for fun. At stock speeds, it already gets 627 FPS on the FPS test map, and by the end of this video, you're gonna see this get well over 700 FPS. Starting with AMD's automatic overclock, it actually lowered my clock speeds from 1244 to 1209. Obviously, the slower the GPU, the less FPS we get, so let's just start manually overclocking. I did not waste any time and got straight to boosting the RX 580 to 1370 MHz on the core clock, keeping the memory at 1750 for now. I also increased the power and temperature limits to the absolute highest. I'm used to seeing the power limit max out at plus 15%, so it's pretty impressive that it lets us draw 50% more power. Already, Fortnite jumped to 680 average FPS, a 7.9% increase, and the 1% lows improved by 9%. This is very good, and you can see our temperatures are still very solid, still 57 degrees. Rocket League also got a nice boost, up 16 average frames, putting us dangerously close to 360 FPS. But I wasn't done yet. I boosted the clocks again, 1425 MHz on the core and 1950 on the memory. This gave us 701 average FPS in Fortnite, over 11% higher than stock. The 1% lows also jumped by 72 FPS compared to when we first started. Rocket League was now sitting at 357 average FPS, just barely under our 360 FPS target. At this stage, we've done a total overclock of nearly 300 MHz, so to get even more performance, we would normally need to mess with voltage control. But for some reason, no matter what I tried, the voltage slider was completely locked. I'm guessing it had to be the GPU's fault since it wouldn't let me see the power usage either. And since I couldn't increase the voltage, we were nearing the physical limits of the GPU. But after literal hours of stress testing, I managed a stable overclock at 1465 MHz on the core and 2104 on the memory. That's a 16.3% increase in core speed and an 18.4% increase in memory speed. The biggest overclock I've ever done on a GPU. Maybe AI Surix isn't that bad after all, but things that seem too good to be true usually are. Passing a stress test should mean you can run any game, but when I tried launching either of the two games, they refused to work. I mean, Rocket League technically opened, but it got stuck on the press start menu and freezes my PC for 30 seconds until it crashes. This left me with no other choice but to mess around with the clock speeds until it was stable enough to run either of the games. In Fortnite, all I had to do was drop the core clock by just 25 MHz, and strangely enough, a 2190 MHz memory clock worked as well, despite anything above 2104 crashing on the stress test. Anyways, with these settings, we finished with 716 average FPS and 629 in the 1% lows. That's a 13.7% and 15.6% improvement overall. Getting Rocket League stable on the other hand was way more annoying. First, it crashed at the press start screen. Then it couldn't render my car properly and crashed again. At one point, my monitor started flickering and you guessed it, it crashed again. Alright, attempt number 897. Shit. After enough trial and error, I landed on the fastest stable overclock this GPU could handle. That gave us 363 average FPS with 333 in the 1% lows. Turn up the clock speeds any higher and the game can't figure out where to put the wheels. The wheels are not supposed to look like that. Oh, wow. I don't think I've ever seen a bug like this before. It is still technically 365 FPS. Nevertheless, this challenge was definitely a success. It was not easy, but it was honestly one of the most satisfying overclocks I've ever done. But if you enjoyed this video and want to see me overclock a $20 GPU until I get 240 FPS, watch this video next.